Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in again. If you've been following along, you know we've got a few goodies for the Frontier here now. And I'm doing kind of a open box install, all kind of mishmashed. So these videos will kind of all be intertwined, but I want to do unboxing before we get it on the truck. And then I'll show you how to install all this stuff, how it's all wired up once this is all actually on the truck. So before we get to that point, we have our winch, and the winch I've chose for this specific build and truck is this, the VR Evo. And you can see by the check mark there too, we have the VR10S. So this does come with a synthetic rope. One thing to keep in mind, you can see the sticker here on top, hopefully it's not too light. It says includes the wired remote only. Now Warn winches, they do have a little plug. It goes into the location where your wired plug goes in, and you could actually control this thing wirelessly. From what I've heard, they were having issues or they recalled the wireless remotes or something like that. So this does not have it, but I believe they do make an aftermarket version now. So if you want to have the wireless capability, you have to order the remote separately. But as for now, and again, they may change this back, they were having issues with the remote, so you will not have the wireless function. But as for the winch itself, everything is the same. So let's get her opened up and show you what's inside. All right, so now that we open her up, right on top, like always, you have your instruction manual and just some other information about your Warn products. In here, you can see different languages, everything you need. It's all in the packaging. As for the winch itself, it's packaged nice and snug in there. You can see it doesn't wobble around. It's got these foam blocks on each side, and this is hard. So it's got a little bit of give to it, so it's not going to be scratching up your new winch. But if you got a crappy delivery man and he's banging the box around, or this thing's rolling around in somebody's trunk or whatever, this can take a lot more beating than anything else would. And then to fill the spaces, they do throw in some cardboard boxes. And now this one sounds like it will have your hardware in it. And then somewhere in here, I'll have to open these all up, is also your negative cable. And this is most likely the fair lead, because that comes in there as well. And then I'm assuming the other box will be the remote. So I'll get this all out of there and we'll see what's what. All right, so now in the skinnier of the two boxes, what's in there is your hook and all the hardware to mount this thing. Some of this will be for the fair lead and some of this will be to mount the actual winch itself to the bumper once we get it on the truck. And now in the medium-sized box, you have your negative cable for the winch itself, and then you have the cable to plug in for your remote, plus the actual remote, which will show you all how this works once it's all wired and working. But that is in box number 2. And then lastly, like I expected, the fair lead is in the long box that was under the winch there. You can see it's got the Warn logo on both sides, so you don't really need to up or down. Only other thing, it gives you a warning if you're one of the special people who don't know a tension cable can chop your fingers off. If you don't want to see that on top, put it that way, it's hidden underneath, or hit it with a little heat gun, peel it off, wipe it up. Won't have any sticker residue left, but you can see it'll bolt on. Everybody knows what winch is going to be hidden underneath this bumper, and you're all set to go. And now another little thing, what Warn's thought of is everyone knows winches are not the lightest things in the world, but to get your fingers in there when it's all packaged like this might be a little much. If you take these foam blocks, they do just pull up. You can see snugged in the middle or on the sides. You can pull those two out, and it's about, ½ inch maybe, just enough that you can get your fingers in there, wiggle this thing out, and you don't have to struggle. And to get that box out, you got to actually move the winch because it's stuck under the wires, and you don't want to be yanking on these wires, because if you pull that out, you're going to have a lot more work than just plugging this in and having fun. All right, now here is the beast itself. Like I said, this is the 10 version. They do make it 8, 10, and 12. They will have slightly different sizing just because obviously the beefier you go, the bigger the motor and everything will be. But this is what you're looking at for the 10S. And I'll give you a quick little run through here just because once this is actually mounted on that bumper, it's a little harder to see, a little harder to show you guys. So we'll do a quick run through. Basically on the side here, you got a little rubber plug. You pull that out and that is where the wire for your remote to make this thing work will plug in. And again, if you find a wireless remote that works here, the idea is it'll come with a little thing that looks kind of like this that'll plug into this spot, and that is what communicates with the wireless remote. So you'll just unplug this, plug your wireless part back in, and it should work exactly like it's supposed to. And then the nice thing is that plugs it all up. It's nice rubber, keeps all the dirt and water and grime out of there, keeps it clean for when you might actually need to use this thing. Here on the right hand side is your clutch. Super easy to turn, not easy enough to wiggle itself around, but you're not struggling to turn that thing back and forth. And basically that is to just let your cable come out. Coming to this side, like you saw before, you have your positive cable that will have to run to your battery. The nice thing about the Warn winches is it's all pre-wired. Everything is pre-wired up here, so all this you don't have to mess with. Only thing you got to do is, if you look here, you have this one nut. You'll loosen that nut off, and your negative cable that I showed you in one of those boxes, that is where it bolts to. So that's the only thing you really got to do. Loosen this nut, put your negative cable on, and then run it somewhere, either to the negative part of your battery or somewhere else where you're going to ground this thing. But literally, other than bolting this actually onto the bumper itself, this is the only thing you got to mess with. And then to bolt this on, I'll show you again once we get going on the actual bumper. If we lay this flat, you've got 4 holes here. They've got little cutouts here. You can see my finger. And in the bag with the goodies to bolt this on, you'll have little square nuts. You basically slide it in there, 1 on each hole, plop this thing on the bumper, and then once it's in there on your bumper, you'll come through the bottom with the bolt and tighten into the little square nuts that you put in those 4 spaces. And that is literally it to bolt this thing on. All right, now through the magic of YouTube, you can see we have our CBI front bumper installed on the truck. You can go back and see this whole process in the other video if you want. So what we're gonna do is get the winch in there. What you wanna do first, you gotta bolt this fairly on, because it goes down here, obviously in the 2 holes where it lines up, but being the covert bumper and how the winch installs down there in those 4 holes, if you put the winch in, you have little to no room to actually get at the head of the bolt or the nut to tighten that thing down. So get that on first, and then you can drop your winch right in here, bolt it down, and we're ready to wire it up. All right, so in the box, you have 1 little baggie. You got 2 bolts, 2 washers, or 4 washers, a lock washer and a flat one, and 2 nuts. That is what bolts this baby on right here. Set it up just like this, lock washer, flat washer. It'll go through, nut on the inside, crank it all down. Then in your other bag, you got 4 bolts. You got these square nuts that will go in the bottom of the winch. I'll show you that in a sec. And washers to go along with it. Then they also send different bolts in case you have a different type of bumper. Possibly you need to have a little bit of a longer bolt or such. But as for us, this is only a thin steel plate, so the bolts that are coming in the bag with the nuts are plenty. So that is to bolt the actual winch down itself. Little baggie for the Fairlead. All right, so we've got her installed. You can see, crank it down until your washer is flush. Then you know you got it tight enough. And if you come to the inside, you can see Warn's got their bolts right down to a T. It is just past the nut. You might think it's not tight enough. That is so when you have your winch inside, this does have a synthetic rope, of course, you don't want that being too long, because when this thing starts spinning, there's a chance it could hook on something, and that'll snag the rope, it'll break it, just make your life miserable. So that is plenty to keep this thing on, and you don't have to worry about it snagging on your brand new winch once you get using it. And one last step before you drop this thing in, like I showed earlier in the video, you want to bolt down your ground wire. 13 mil nut, thread it off, put it in, tighten her down. That's all you need to do. And that is done. The rest of the wiring is all pre-wired from Warn. So now you are ready to get your little square nuts here. They each go in the 4 little holes on each corner underneath the winch. Right there, you can see Richard getting one in there. Because we have to pick this thing up and angle it down. I recommend getting a piece of tape or something and put it on each 4 corners, because when you tip this down, 2 are going to go too far in and 2 are going to fall out. And then when it's in there, of course, it's very tight space, especially with this type of bumper. So you don't want to be messing around in there. Make your life easier. Put a little piece of tape on, drop her in, and then you can thread the bolts from underneath. All right, so the winch is in. Like I said, harsh angle, down, slope underneath. If you got an extra pair of hands, makes your life a lot easier. If not, just be careful, you'll get it in. You can see she fits nice and snug in there. So now as for the bolts to bolt this thing on, same idea as the other part. You got 1 lock washer, 1 regular washer, all 4 underneath, and it'll thread into those 4 square nuts we put in earlier. And unless you got really small hands, before you actually bolt the thing underneath, you want to get your line through here. You can come up here, just release the little clutch, turn it, it'll be freewheeling, turn it back, it's locked. So cut off the zap strap, just get your hand in there, wiggle it through. Once you can get enough right here, as long as it's freewheeling, you can pull it. It's very easy to pull out. Leave it hanging, now you can tighten her down. For wiring, we're just gonna go along here, and then because the bumper is off, we actually have a wiring harness right here. Goes up, does connect to your fog lights and stuff, but if you follow it up in here, you can see it'll come pop up, and it goes along here behind your battery. So as long as you just follow that, you got something to strap to. You'll have no sharp edges to worry about cutting the wires, and it'll lead straight to where you need it to go. All right, and one last step after you get everything bolted down is obviously to get your hook. Warren does send the hook. You got your little safety rope here. You can hang on to that if you're pulling your winch in. You're not going to worry about sucking your fingers into this thing. So this is the hook they give you. Got a little cotter pin. Just pull that out. This pin pops out. You can slide it through the loop, pop the pin back in, put your cotter pin in, spread her open so that it's not going to fall out. If you're really worried, you can open it more, but these things don't really squish on their own, so it'll hold. And then last but not least, we just have to wire it up. So if you come up here, we got the whole truck back together. The wires came up through here. We got positive right to the battery here, negative right to the battery here. So straight on, don't put anything in this, right to the battery for both. All right, so now that we have this all wired up, you can see you can just barely fit your arm through that hole, but if you got skinnier arms, like me and Richard here, you can just reach in far enough to plug your remote in. If you're any bit of a buff guy or got some weight on you, this bumper may not be for you, especially if you want a winch. So we've got it plugged in. You can tell the red light's on, so you got power. And now you can see, pulls out, hit the in, and she goes in.